Greetings, guitar engineers. I'm Desi, and in this video I have another installment of How Does This Song Work, featuring Please Come Home for Christmas by the Eagles. Now, rather than teach you the specific guitar parts played in this song, I want to give you a general overview of the song and teach you its basic changes so you understand the basic structure and the music theory and the use of composition techniques such as secondary dominance and chromatic voice leading. In order to teach you these things, I'm going to focus on just the very basic chord changes, and I'm going to play them in a position that helps you understand the musical movement on the fretboard. You can follow along with the free tab that I provide, watch it in the video, or see the link in the video description. All right, now I'm going to give you a complete playthrough of the song, and after I do that, I'm going to walk you through all of the chord changes and explain everything that's happening. All right, so that's how I've chosen to play the chords in order to teach you how this song works. It's one thing to just memorize chords from some tablature and play along with the song, and it's another thing to actually understand how those chords go together. So I want to teach you the music theory behind this song. Let's get started. It's in the key of A major. So you want to think about an A major chord and the A major scale, however you might play it. Think about the harmonized scale, that is playing the scale with chords, that major-minor sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. So that is the basic structure of this key, but there's a little bit more going on than just those chords. So let's dive in. At the very top of the progression, we have A major 7, and and then A dominant 7th. Now, right away, we have something out of key. A major 7 is in the key of A major. We have the F sharp in the scale, but A dominant 7th, which you can just say A7, has a flat 7th, a G natural in there, and that's not in the scale. So already something is happening here. And what's happening is that you're using an A7 to create a dominant push to the 4 chord in this key D. And the reason why that works is because if we think about the key of D for a second, where D is 1, its 5 chord is A, and when you add a 7th to it using scale tones, you make an A 7th chord. The 5th degree is called the dominant, and that A7 creates tension that leads to and resolves on D. That happens in the key of D, but you can also use that in other keys when you want to lead from A to D, and that's what's happening here. We're in the key of A, which doesn't have an A7, but we're going to throw it in there anyway and use its sound to lead to and resolve to the D, which in this case is the 4 chord. And backing up, we have a little bit of chromatic voice leading, because if you follow the notes in A major 7, and A7, we have a descending chromatic voice leading here with A, G sharp, and G natural in the chords. And if we keep following that, we could take it down to F sharp, which is in the 4 chord D, although I didn't actually play that particular F sharp. I played D like this. There's the F sharp on top, but whatever, musically that's kind of what's happening. You've got that chromatic voice leading in the chords. Now if you look at the official tab, which is available on websites like Sheet Music Direct, and you see the actual guitar parts played in the song, you'll see that they weren't using the particular chords in the position that I'm choosing to play them in. And the reason why I'm playing them differently is because I think it makes it easier for you to see the musical movement on the fretboard, which is really what this lesson is all about. I'm giving you an overview of the song so you understand its structure. Before we continue, let's talk about the time signature of this music. If you look at the music, you see a fraction 12/8, and that means 12/8 time, which means there are 12 eighth notes per measure, and you would count this music 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now another way that you might choose to feel it and count it is in groups of 4 with a triplet on each beat, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's the same thing. However you want to think of it, we have a triplet feel here. So back to the chords, we had A major 7, A dominant 7th, which leads to the 4 chord D. And then after this, you go into a D sharp, and the actual chord is B7/D sharp. So think about a B7 that you'd play like this. And if you just take the notes on strings 4, 3, and 2 and play them with these fingers, then your index finger is free to play the major third of the B chord down here in the 5th string. That's a B7/D sharp. Normally the D sharp is up here under your middle finger when you play a B7 chord, but that's also D sharp. And there is no D sharp in the A major scale. So again, we have something added here. And what we have, you can think of this in 2 different ways. First and foremost, you can think about a secondary dominant. That's when you would make a dominant chord for some other scale degree other than the 5th, where the dominant chord is naturally built. So in this case, we would expect an E7 in the key of A, but not a B7. If you play a B7, that means you've added a secondary dominant, and I'll talk more about that later because it comes up again. But really what's happening here is more of this chromatic movement going from D to D sharp, and And if we keep following that bass note, it would lead to E, which is part of the A chord that's going to come next. So we're getting that sound. This is really common in music. So this chord by itself sounds pretty strange and out of place, but when you put it in between the right chords, it actually makes a really nice, smooth transition that makes sense to our ears. And that's common musical movement, especially in this style, which is kind of a R&B, kind of Motown soul. Comes up in a lot of Christmas songs too, like somewhere along the lines, this chromatic movement just became very common in a lot of kind of old school Christmas songs. You hear it in like Jingle Bell Rock and that sort of thing with some diminished chords. And you could also think of this as a diminished chord. You could play D sharp diminished, a little bit different fingering. This is not how I have it tabbed, but there is a D sharp diminished chord. That would be all minor thirds. Just like that. And if you look at those notes, you've got D sharp, F sharp, A. Whoops. Yeah. Excuse me. D sharp, F sharp, A, C. And if you play the B7/D sharp, well, we have 3 of those 4 notes. We have the D sharp, and we have the A, and we have the D sharp again, and there's the F sharp. So there's kind of a close relationship there, and you could use these chords interchangeably. You could think of it as B7/D sharp, or you can think of it as D sharp diminished. In the actual official tab, they notated it as a B7/D sharp, and I think that makes sense because if you look at what the guitar is actually doing in the song, at that point, the guitar is picking through this common B7 chord fingering, but the bass player is playing a D sharp. So I think they correctly labeled that B7/D sharp. But you can think of diminished chord there anyway, and this is based on chromatic voice leading. I talk about this stuff in my guitar theory course, Fretboard Theory, Volume 2. In Volume 1, you learn like pentatonic scales and major scales and the cage system and harmonizing the scale and the number system, and you get introduced to modes. Basically everything that doesn't involve adding things to the scale like this or borrowing from other keys. I cover that in Volume 2, where I get into chromatic voice leading and borrowed chords and modal interchange. And so all of this stuff makes sense once you get to that point. And this song is a great example of using a lot of those composition techniques that I teach in that portion of the course. Okay, I'm going to go back to the beginning. So we have A major 7, A dominant 7th, then we go into the D, chromatic half step, up to the D sharp, then from there it's A, D, and then that's A, E/G, F sharp minor. And here we're just going backward in the major scale from the 1 chord A to the 6 chord F sharp minor, and we're going to use the 7th scale degree in between. But instead of playing the chord, which is naturally built on the 7th degree, which is a minor flat 5, sometimes called a diminished triad, but not the same thing as a full diminished chord like I talked about earlier. See Fretboard Theory Volume 2 for a full explanation on that. Instead of playing that, we're actually going to play the 5 chord E, and we can play this in some different positions, but we need to get the G sharp in there. So I'm going to play E like in C form, just part of it, and then use my thumb to grab the G sharp. So that's the first inversion of an E chord. So I go A, E/G sharp, and then I play the F sharp minor with wraparound 2. But you could go you could play the C form like this and then just reach over with your index finger. Or you could play E like this as a power chord, and then so you could do like A. Or you can skip the chord there and just play the G sharp. So the important thing to understand is that we're just moving backward in the scale. We're not adding any chromatic stuff. These notes are right in the scale. These chords are right out of the scale. But from here next, we go to a B7, and then an E7, and an E augmented. So let me explain that. So B is the 2 chord. Normally it's minor. But in this case, we're going to play it as a dominant 7th. This is a secondary dominant, and it's going to create that tension and that dominant push to E major. So B7 naturally leads to and resolves to E major, because in the E major scale, B is the 5 chord. It's naturally a dominant 7th, and it leads to and resolves to the tonic E. So we're borrowing that movement, and we're going to use it here in the key of A. Normally B is minor. But since our end goal is we want to get to E, why not throw a B7 in there, which gives a nice strong dominant push. So here's A, and then E, or I actually played E7, if you know this fingering. And then from here, played an E augmented. So let's play an E major, root, 3rd, and 5th. That's in C form there. If I raise that 5th, that's an E augmented. A sharp 5th is also called an augmented 5th. And what this does is it really just adds, it's another way you can add tension to this chord. Instead of playing a dominant 7th, which adds tension and leads to and resolves to A in this case, you could play an E augmented. It's another way to add tension that leads to and wants to resolve back to A. You have a little bit of kind of chromatic voice leading in the sense that you've got a B in the E chord, and then B sharp or C into the C sharp of the A chord. So a lot of this chromatic half-step movement in this song. And again, this stuff actually occurs in popular music frequently. I saved this stuff for Fretboard Theory Volume 2 because you have to understand more foundational stuff before you start doing this fancy stuff here. But that's what this lesson is all about. So after the little descending part there, we have 2, 5, 1. And when you get to 1 there, it's just a repeat, and you go through all the same changes again from the top. And then second ending. So again, with that 2, 5, 1, little faster turnaround there, just half a measure of each chord. No augmented there, just dominant 7th. Back to 1, then 1, 7, which creates a dominant push into the 4 chord D, and that's where the bridge begins. Okay, hang on. We're in the key of A. A fits, D major fits. Where does D minor come from? Why does that fit in there? And maybe you didn't even notice that that was out of place there, because sonically it works so well in those chord changes, it doesn't really sound out of place. So we have more chromatic voice leading here. So we've got A7 that leads to D with an F sharp on top. Then you drop that F sharp to F natural. There's an F on top now, and then that note drops again to E when you go back to the A chord. So that's our chromatic movement here. So you're connecting the F sharp and the D to the E and the A with a little chromatic half step there, and that's why there is a brief D minor in there. And that's why that works, because you're going from a chord tone and you're resolving on a chord tone and you're putting a little half step in between. Some people think about this as the Beatles chord change, that minor 4 chord. Think of songs like Nowhere Man. That's how some people got introduced to it originally, but it actually occurs in many songs. And once you return to A, you play. So 1, 5, using the augmented version of it. Back to 1 with the dominant 7th, which leads you back into the 4 chord again. We're going to do that chromatic voice leading thing again. D minor. You expect it to go to A, but here's a twist. It goes to B7 instead. And then ends on the 5 chord, first playing it as a dominant 7th and then as an augmented. So I just talked about this chromatic voice leading. It works because you go down to A there. Your ear kind of got introduced to that the first time. And then the second time around, still acceptable to your ear, but then you get a surprise. 2, 5, 1. I'm sorry. 2, 5. Hang on the 5 chord. You can arpeggiate that E augmented. And then this takes us into the next verse. A major 7, A dominant 7th, which leads into the D. Half step motion here. B over D sharp. And then we have, oh, there's something new. Okay. So A to the 3 chord, which is normally C sharp minor, but in this case it's C sharp dominant 7th. And what do you think that is? It's a secondary dominant. Secondary dominants always lead up a 4th, right? A7 led to D, E leads to A, B7 leads to E. C sharp minor is going to lead to F sharp. So we are using it to lead up a 4th here. And from here you play. Oh, what's happening there? So C sharp leads to F sharp. And let's just think about the bass notes here. The bass does a little descending line, going right down the scale. 6, 5, 4, F sharp, E, D, D sharp, E. So put in a little chromatic movement there. And then here's the chords that fit with that. F sharp. Now when you go down to E, you might expect to play the E chord, but you know what? The chord actually stays on F sharp minor. And just the bass player drops down to E. And the way I like to play this when I'm doing the chords is I just skip the chord and just play the bass note. Then we have the 4 chord D, B sharp over D sharp, B7 over D sharp. And then when you get to E, you're not playing an E chord, you're actually playing an A chord, playing an A/E. So it's. That's how that works out. And when I play that D sharp, that B7 over D sharp, sometimes I just play this much of it. Because it goes by so quickly, I don't always have time to get my fingers in this position, so I go. Into A like that. And then once you get to A, you want to think 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. Very jazzy here. 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. The one chord that you initially play is with the 5th E in the bass, so that's going to be our 1 chord. 6. 2 chord is going to be dominant 7th. 5 chord is dominant 7th, and then back to 1. So it's 1 chord with the 5th in the bass. And if I back up from that C sharp, now remember, the guitar is not playing the chords and the bass notes. The bass player is playing the bass in the actual original recording by the Eagles, which is not the original recording because it's a cover of an older song. But the bass player is playing the bass notes, and then the guitarists are free to play notes of the chords along with it without always needing to be concerned about having the bass notes in there. I want to just teach you how to understand what's happening musically in the song, and that's why I've chosen to play the chords the way that I'm playing them and to put the bass notes in there so you understand kind of the big picture. That's the point of this lesson. How does this song work? But as we are putting this together, and if you're finding it challenging to play the chords and the proper bass note, that's okay, because that's not typically how we guitar players would play. I'm just doing it that way to help you understand what's happening here musically. So this section concludes with that A chord in the first ending, then you go to an E augmented, and then you follow the repeat sign and you're back to the top of this verse that we just played. And there's a guitar solo that happens here, and I'll come back to this and talk about it in a minute, but for now the chord changes are the same. Kind of slows down a little bit. Second ending, you get to A, D, 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 A, or 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 1. All right, so that's really everything you need to know about the chords and the chord movement in this song. And if you know a little bit of theory, if you understand the harmonized scale, you understand dominant 7th chords, then this probably made sense to you. If you're not familiar with those things, maybe a lot of this went over your head, so you might be getting ahead of yourself. You can go ahead and memorize the tab and play this, but you might look into a guitar theory course like fretboard theory. Make sure you understand what I teach in the first volume before you move on to the second volume, where I get into a lot of details like this, because if you don't have the right foundation, if you don't understand some more fundamental things, then it's difficult for you to see how we build on top of that to do this sort of stuff. But you can take a look at fretboard theory. But right now we want to take a look at the guitar solo. So I'm going to switch sounds here. Before I do, I'm playing a Telecaster. I was on the bridge pickup the whole time. I'm using my Kemper profiling amplifier. I'm using a vintage 1968 Marshall Super Lead amp profile, and I have it set clean. It's kind of at the edge of breakup. It's not completely clean. And I've got reverb and a little bit of compression and chorus added to my sound there. But now I'm going to switch it over to a Fender Tweed Deluxe amplifier, and this is going to give me an overdriven sound. And let me explain briefly what's happening in the guitar solo to the song. Okay, so we're in the key of A major. So your first kind of go-to scales would be the A major scale or the A major pentatonic scale, and that's what this solo is played in. So think about the A major pentatonic, pattern 1, the way that most people know it, up here in the 14th position. You might think of it as F sharp minor pentatonic, or it's A major pentatonic. And this whole solo is basically played from the E on the 4th string at the 14th fret to the E on the 2nd string at the 17th fret, all just in between that position there. So you don't need to go use any more of this particular pattern. And it's pretty simple stuff here. I don't have this tabbed out, but I'll just play it for you. So super simple. We've got a whole step bend on the 2nd string. Sometimes we use a whole step bend on the 3rd string. And sometimes it's just a half step bend, like gives it a bluesy minor sort of sound there. And a little bit of the 4th string in there. So even though there's a lot of jazz type chord changes in this song, the lead guitarist, Don Felder, according to what I've read online, chose not to try to follow those changes like a jazz player would and outline all of those chords with arpeggios or emphasize the 7ths, which is what a jazz player might do. Instead, he decided to just treat this like a rhythm and blues song, stick with the pentatonic, stick with those common bends, and, you know, created just a super simple solo, but some tasty licks with just the right touch and tone. That's why they called him Don Fingers Felder, and it's just a perfect solo, and it's short and sweet and to the point, and it fits right over a portion of these chord changes without sounding complicated. Sounds very pleasant to the ear. Again, because we're not trying to follow all those chord changes and chord tones there. And then after you get through that solo, you just finish with the rest of the chords there, the second half of that final verse, and then into the ending. And one final thing that I can add is at the beginning of the song and at the end of the song, you hear the piano play these notes. And they are also from you could think of them as the pentatonic scale. So same scale pattern from the solo here, and I just played A, E, F sharp, C sharp. So think about the pentatonic pattern and think about kind of playing in fourths. Like that. And I think the piano is actually playing octaves, so you could play octaves too. So you can go. All right, well, that completes my lesson on how this song works. Please Come Home for Christmas by the Eagles. Did you learn something from this video? Did you find something interesting? Post in the comments below and let me know. If you have any questions, you can post in the comments below and I'll reply. If some of this music theory talk has gone over your head and you need to learn more about it, go to my website, guitarmusictheory.com, answer the questions I ask you about your playing, and I'll send you free custom video instruction calibrated to your current level. I'll show you what you specifically need to be working on right now so you fill in gaps in your playing and in your knowledge. That way you can become a better guitar player, make progress, and reach your music goals. Enroll in your free video course now at guitarmusictheory.com. You can click on the link in the video description. All right, well, thanks for watching. I'm Desi Cerna. Before you go, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Click the notification bell to receive alerts when new videos are uploaded. Then keep playing and stay tuned for more.